Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another book review. So, what if the real horror isn't a monster? It's a system that quietly eats your life. So, today's episode is a Pyun Hye-young Roundup. So, I'm going to move through four works that map her fictional world of slow dread and social rot. So I'm going to do the novel The Owl Cries, and then To the Kennels and Other Stories, a short story collection. And then I'll focus on two short stories, Holiday Home and then Evening Proposal. And so I'll try and trace some of Pyun's signature tensions in these stories. So missing people and missing morals, work that deforms the soul and the body, and cities that behave like predators. And I'll try and highlight why these stories are so effective. So, hello, I'm Barry. This is Seoul Book Club. And I'm going to start with The Owl Cries. So, the Korean title of The Owl Cries is Sochok Sup e Katta, which translates as Went to the Western Forest. And the Korean edition was published in 2012. And the English translation by Pyun's regular translator, Sora Kim Russell, was published in October 2023. So, as I've mentioned before in previous reviews of Pyun's novels and short stories, she is often celebrated for the psychological depth of her stories and for having very haunting narratives. And of course, over her career, she's established herself as a very formidable voice in contemporary Korean and now global literature. And so she was born in Seoul in 1972, and she studied at Hanyang University, where she did a bachelor's in creative writing. So she wanted to be a writer from when she was an undergraduate. She did a master's degree in Korean literature, and she has done I think four short story collections, so only two of which have been completely translated. So, To the Kennels, which I'll talk about in a little minute or two, and Evening Proposal. And then also the novels City of Ash and Red, The Lot of Lines, and The Whole. And all three of those have been translated, and I've reviewed all three of those on the channel. So yes, very highly recognized for her contributions to Korean literature, modern Korean literature. She's won lots of the big prestigious awards here in Korea. So the Hanguk Ilbo Literary Award, the Lee Hyo-sok Literature Prize, and of course, she won the Shirley Jackson Award in 2017 for the English translation of The Whole. And her storytelling, her writing is often marked by this ability to blend the mundane with the uncanny. And she sort of makes the world at once familiar and unsettling. And her characters are often placed in situations that compel them to confront their deepest fears, their deepest desires. And we can certainly see that in The Owl Cries. So here, Pyun continues to explore themes of alienation, exploitation, and the unseen forces that can shape our lives. And this work not only offers a window into the dark heart and soul of modern Korea, but it also speaks to more universal human fears and anxieties. And of course, this is why her work resonates so much. So, what is the premise of The Owl Cries? So it's kind of a thriller. It was marketed as a thriller anyway. So the story takes place in a small, remote town next to an enormous forest. And for decades, the entire village has relied primarily on the logging industry, but also on a research institute to support the local economy. However, the Research Institute has relocated, and some restrictions have been placed on logging, and this has led to a downturn in the local economy. And at the story's beginning, we're introduced to Insu. Insu has been appointed to the role of park ranger for the forest during the off season. And Insu is a recovering alcoholic with a dark past. And one day he is visited by a lawyer who claims to be looking for his older brother who has disappeared. The lawyer says that his older brother was Insu's predecessor in the park ranger position. Insu doesn't know anything about this. He doesn't know what's happened to the lawyer's brother. He doesn't really know anything about the previous park ranger or why he left the job. And the first section of the book follows this, out of town lawyer who's visiting, the small town as he tries to investigate his brother's disappearance. And the locals, this sort of small town locals and the long term residents are very reluctant to help. And it seems that something is not quite right in this sleepy, remote town by the big forest. So, what has happened to the missing park ranger? Why are the locals acting in such a strange way? Why do they seem scared? And Insu and the lawyer are compelled to investigate and uncover the mystery. But perhaps things aren't as they seem. And Insu also has his own problems. He's a recovering alcoholic who doesn't trust his own memories, and he finds himself thinking, what is real and what is an alcohol withdrawal induced hallucination? So Insu's not a reliable character in terms of the information he is sharing and processing. And Pyun uses these elements to spin a very dark and ultimately kind of existential mystery about debt, addiction, and exploitation. It's a typically bleak story. It's a chilling story, and it's quite a gripping story as well, until it reaches this despair-laden conclusion. So, what themes do we see Pyun exploring in Owl Cries? So, in a true Pyun Hye-young fashion, this novel is essentially about how society is poisonous and destructive. So, if we think of the small town in the story as a microcosm for society as a whole, the point she's making becomes clearer. So, the structure of the town is designed to manipulate and mislead people. Everyone is involved in some kind of petty deception or scheme to get an edge over the people around them. Debt is used to trap everyone, and people are bound together by the evil things they have done. And only one person can extract enough wealth to sit at the top of this society. Everyone jealously guards their advantage, and many are so inebriated that they don't even really know what reality is. The wealth generated by the local resources is funneled away from the local area. It's not reinvested in the area itself. Families are destroyed by alcohol. Work is not fulfilling, and on and on and on and on. And these are all very familiar themes and ideas that Pyun often explores. And Pyun sees modern society as a force that leads to atomization. Everyone is alienated, everyone is lonely, and many of Pyun's characters find themselves isolated by their own psychological barriers or the sort of wider social forces around them. And she shows how this isolation affects people psychologically and affects people's interactions with one another. And what she's doing here is exploring the psychological complexities of her characters, their fears, their desires, the darker aspects of the human mind, and in a story that often blurs the lines between reality and perception. So also we have this very interesting setting. So how does the setting of this little town contribute to the novel's atmosphere? So the setting here is fantastic. So we have this very small, remote town, and it's sort of enveloped by this enigmatic forest. And this is crucial in crafting the novel's haunting, sort of strange and uncanny atmosphere. So the setting here is not just a backdrop, but the forest. It's a living, breathing entity that mirrors the characters' inner conflicts and emotional turmoil. So the eerie silence of the town, and we have all this unsettling owl imagery And this all just works to amplify the sense of unease and the sense of foreboding that permeates the story. And the whole story is just sort of steeped in dread, and it's as if the land, the forest, is a physical manifestation of the villagers' fears. The forest also acts as a sort of boundary between the known and the unknown, the seen and the unseen. And again, this sort of reflects the characters' journey into the darker aspects of their desires and psychology. So within this kind of liminal space, the novel, it looks at these themes, like I've said, of isolation, identity, just the human propensity for fear and despair. And in essence, the setting here, the setting of the Owl Cries, is a character in its own right, a sort of meticulously crafted character, and it's very integral to the sort of the narrative's exploration of human nature. And it's really just this very atmospheric canvas upon which the novel paints a very vivid picture of a community just crumbling at the edges. And again, just highlights Pyun's skill at a sort of weaving these things together: the setting, the atmosphere, the themes of the story. Very effective. So what can we learn anything from this? What can we take from this a novel like this? So the novel offers readers a very bleak look into the complexities of human nature and the sort of social constructs that shape our experiences. It's very rich in psychological depth, and it challenges you to think about your own individual motivations or the social pressures that weigh on you, the fine line between right and wrong. And it's just a very good story that explores alienation and moral dilemmas. And it's a very engaging book, very bleak, very dark, not really a thriller as such, but it is quite gripping in its way. So from one town's rot to a whole map of unease, if the Owl Cries is a single bleak forest, then To the Kennels is the fog spreading street by street. 8 stories where ordinary lives are just warping at the edges. So To the Kennels is a short story collection, one of Pyun's short story collections. And, I'm melting again sitting here. Okay, so it's a very, very good short story collection. The Korean title is Sayukchang Choguro, and it was originally published in Korean in 2007, and the English translation was published earlier this year, 2025. And the translators are, again, Sora Kim Russell and also Heinz Insu Finkel. And this collection offers a series of very unsettling tales that explore the eerie undercurrents of everyday life. And the stories here cover a range of scenarios, from a couple's fog-shrouded road trip that spirals into a surreal nightmare, to a family's dream of suburban bliss unraveling amidst financial strain and the incessant barking from nearby kennels, and many, many more. So Pyun infuses these stories with, again, psychological depth, understated suspense, and touches of the uncanny, and creates a quite horrific tapestry that I think is both familiar and disconcerting. So her prose examines the complexities of modern Korean life. She's sort of revealing the latent anxieties and disconnections that permeate our lives, and it's again just a very thought-provoking read. And many of these stories, I'm sure, will stay with you after you finish the collection. So, what kind of stories do we have here? What can we expect from this collection? So, we have 8 eerie and unsettling short stories. These aren't these aren't plot-driven tales. They're more like quiet, creeping portraits of people whose lives are slipping out of their control. And the stories are set in grey, nameless cities and anonymous towns that are labeled only by letters and These are, places that can feel oddly familiar but disorienting at the same time. The characters are everyday people, so a middle manager in a company, a construction worker, just a run of the mill couple going on a weekend trip. And these are people who find themselves caught up in strange and sometimes claustrophobic situations. Some are subtly surreal, like a man who starts losing his grip on reality after misplacing a briefcase. In contrast, others are grounded in realism, but are still deeply disturbing. So, like that family that's just plagued by the relentless barking of dogs from nearby kennels. And these stories, they often end ambiguously, but that's part of their power. So Pyun doesn't offer clear resolutions. Instead, she drops us into these bleak little slices of life where the unease lingers and nothing feels quite right. So it's a collection that explores the horror of the everyday, of financial stress, of social alienation and quiet despair, but does it in such a skillful, atmospheric way that you will find yourself completely absorbed, even as you are unsettled. So it's not a warm or cheerful read by any stretch of the imagination, but it is fascinating and it really stays with you. So if you like fiction that blurs the line between the ordinary and the uncanny, this collection is absolutely worth a look. And so the stories are definitely bleak, but like I say, it's in a very compelling way. And I think what draws readers in is this ability to turn these everyday situations into something deeply unsettling without ever tipping into full blown horror. So it's a quiet, creeping dread that builds beneath the surface of these very ordinary lives. So there's no sort of jump scares. There's just this slow realization that something's not right. So this could be a house that's slowly sinking into decay, or a road trip that never seems to end, or a man who starts losing touch with reality after a minor misstep, a minor indiscretion. And part of the appeal here is how relatable the starting points are. These characters are people you might know or even be. They're just people dealing with work stress or relationship breakdowns or money troubles or just the sheer exhaustion of modern life. And Pyun adds just enough strangeness, so like an escaped zoo animal or a neighbor's suspicious behavior, or a crumbling wall near an ancient tomb, that just sort of push these stories into this kind of uncanny area. And even though the tone is just undeniably dark, there's something very satisfying about these stories. So, Pyun really taps into this shared feeling of unease. Like we're all just barely holding it together. And these stories kind of show us that maybe we're not alone in that. And there's also kind of a beauty in her restraint. She never over explains, she never overplays her hand or, wraps things up neatly. And it's this ambiguity that actually keeps the stories alive in your mind long after you've finished them. So, yes, very bleak, but it's a kind of bleakness that feels weirdly familiar. And at least for me as a reader, I think they're quietly addictive. Let me just mention two stories in particular that I really liked. But really, I could almost choose any of these two stories, any two stories from the collection. But let's talk about Night Work. So it sounds like a very simple story. You have a man who is trying to secretly demolish a crumbling wall connected to an ancient tomb, and the reason is he can't get the sort of planning permission from the local bureaucrats in the local council to knock down this decaying wall. So he decides that he will do it surreptitiously, at nighttime. He'll sneak out every night and he'll knock down a little bit of this wall, and hopefully none of the neighbors will sort of grass him up to the authorities. And his house that he lives in is kind of decaying, and just everything around him seems to be rotting, and it's very atmospheric. It sounds ridiculous, right? It's just this guy creeping out every night to try and knock down part of a wall, but the dread just builds so much. You know it's not going to end well for this poor guy, right? And then there's a story called Friday Hello, And this is a much more grounded story. So we have three men who meet every week to play cards. And it's not because they're close friends, but because they enjoy the relief of not having to explain themselves. And this one's sort of about, male loneliness and friendship and the need to connect. And it was surprisingly poignant. And it sort of shows how even this very quiet shared routine can become a lifeline in a world where people are otherwise isolated. And so here we have this, this emotional resonance that's hidden in bleakness, but it gives the stories this quiet power. So, you'll often hear some people comparing, and it's such a lazy, in a way, it's a very lazy comparison, though. Compare Pyun Hye-young to Shirley Jackson or Stephen King. And these are kind of helpful. They're kind of fair and they're kind of helpful as a frame of reference. So, Pyun is sort of writing about psychological unease or creating psychological unease in the reader. And she does exploit alienation and decay and terror, sort of quiet daily terror with an almost surgical precision. But she very much has a style of her own. And of course, she embeds contemporary Korean anxieties into her fiction, like urban isolation or financial instability. And often we might find these little subtle critiques of conformity. And sometimes our characters feel sort of more like symbols. They represent just a poor, suffering every man or woman than fleshed out individuals. But they absolutely feel real. They're stand-ins for all of us. They're these poor, suffering people navigating a world that doesn't feel solid, doesn't feel fair anymore, doesn't feel solid any longer. So if you like fiction that's a little strange, a little sad, very unsettling, then you should absolutely pick up that collection. Now, after those anonymous cities, Holiday Home narrows the lens to one man carrying the military's pecking order into civilian life and discovering the rules didn't stay on base. So let's move on to a short story called Holiday Home. And this was published in Korean in 2020, again translated into English by Sora Kim Russell. And this was published in English by Asia Publishers as part of their K fiction series. And the English translation came out in 2020. And so this is just a one-off short story. So Holiday Home is interesting because it engages with the complexities of military life and its impact on individuals. So of course, all Korean men have to do almost 2 years in the military. And, I can't actually think of many stories that deal with someone who's been in the military and then they're back. They've had to go back into civilian life, and that's what this story is about. So the story is about the life of Lee Jin-soo, and he's a former soldier, and he's struggling to adjust to civilian life after he has been discharged due to a scandal. So there's been some kind of scandal, and as the story begins or sort of hints about what the scandal was, but it's not fully explained, but it does become important later in the story. But so there's some scandal in his background. He's had to leave the army, and now he's struggling to to become reaccustom himself to the daily life of a non-soldier. And so through his experiences and his interactions with his wife and customers and people that he eventually has to work with, the story examines the sort of power dynamics and social hierarchy, right, as compared to his. He was used to the sort of army hierarchy, but now he has to sort of reintegrate into regular society with a different set of power dynamics and a different sort of hierarchy that he has to learn how to operate inside. And so we get this nuanced view of the psychological and the social impact of military service in Korea. And here, so this Pyun storytelling is notable for its subtlety, and again it's a surprisingly deep story. There's a lot of things going on underneath the surface, and obviously you're sort of invited to kind of ponder the broader implications of the story of Insu's problems that he's experiencing. And one of the main focuses on this in the story. So you've got Jin-soo and his wife, but then also it becomes significant is this relationship with his former military junior, a guy called Park. And their relationship adds sinister undertones, a sort of sinister layer to the story, and it reveals this quite intricate nature of these personal and social dynamics. So we find out that the scandal it might have had something to do with the manipulation of supply prices, or maybe that is a cover for perhaps something much crueler that happened between Jinsu and maybe Park. But anyway, when he's trying to get back into civilian life, he really makes a genuine attempt to, he has an honest go of it. So he opens a beef restaurant with his wife, and at first they're doing good, but then there's competition from other restaurants, and this cuts into their profits, and there's all these kind of like the price of suppliers, like the prices go up, and they try and charge more money, but then fewer customers come. So they make an honest goal to run this restaurant, but it eventually fails due to fraudulent practices. And it really seems like a mini tragedy, right? They really try to to make this restaurant successful, and they try to do everything honestly, but it just comes apart. And I often wonder, there's so many restaurants in my neighborhood, and I wonder how they all manage to stay open. And anyway, so his personal issues are sort of they run in parallel to problems they're interconnected with the problems that his family is experiencing. So his son has been bullied at school and wants to stay in Canada for language training. He doesn't want to come back to Korea. And his wife is obviously very dissatisfied with their relationship. And this sort of little family unit, what happens to them, this sort of tragedy that happens to them, really captures anxieties and despair, that people experience in their daily life. You're just trying to survive, you're just trying to get by, but you're just sort of beset on every side by all these different problems. And then you have this conclusion, this kind of conclusion. They have, after their beef restaurant fails, they open this holiday. They purchase a holiday home, and but then again it doesn't go well either. This holiday home doesn't make them much money. But there's a conclusion, not a confrontation as such, but Park sort of comes back unexpectedly into Jinsu's life. They have a kind of reunion. And it's against this sort of backdrop of Jinsu's failed restaurant, his financial difficulties. And it's a very tense meeting, and it's sort of fraught with unspoken history. And, through this meeting, the story is sort of subtly hinting at and exploring the sort of themes of responsibility and victimhood, and the sort of long lasting impact of your actions. And again, it reveals the intricate and sometimes absurd nature of sort of interpersonal dynamics. And anyway, so the key idea here is this challenge of adjusting from military to civilian life, and Jinsu grappling with his past, dealing with the present, struggling to reintegrate. And then Pyun is sort of showing how past actions and experiences shape your present reality, and often in ways that are complex and morally ambiguous. And I am absolutely melting here. It is super hot. Okay, last section, and then we'll get out of here. Okay, so let's talk about Evening Proposal. So this is the title story from this collection. I actually reviewed this collection already on the channel, but several years ago I wrote an essay about this title story. So I will share that essay here. So Pyun's stories are populated by characters struggling with the challenges presented by compressed modernity, the compressed modernity of South Korean society and history. And Pyun repeatedly takes as her theme the rapid development and transformation of South Korean economic, social, and political life, and examines its impact on people living in the margins. So there is the recently bereaved man in bodies, whose world is upended when two giant buildings are erected on either side of his humble, unassuming restaurant, and his wife goes missing on a fishing trip. There's the unnamed protagonist of Owl Cuniculi, who comes face to face with the crushing existential pointlessness of his job. And in Mallow Gardens, that symbol of post war Korean modernity, the apartment becomes the focal point for a nightmarish dystopian vision of a city festering with disease. And in Evening Proposals, Mr. Kim, we have a man whose life is characterized by ennui and emotional disconnect. So, South Korea is a country arguably defined by extremes and seeming dichotomies, such as rapid change and rigid social structure, or ostentatious wealth living alongside visible poverty. In a mere 50 years, South Korea has experienced almost relentless development. In 1963, South Korea's per capita GNP was a lowly $100. By 2005, however, the South Korean economy was famously the 11th biggest in the world. A vast and systematic restructuring of society accompanied this near unprecedented economic growth. For example, in 1960, the country's urban population was but 28%. Look again in 2005, and this had skyrocketed to a massive 81.5%. In 2005, the country also recorded the world's lowest fertility rate. Yet, despite these historically unprecedented developments, significant social adjustment had almost been entirely resisted in other important areas of life. And during the 1998 economic crisis, around 90% of South Koreans still regarded elderly care as the primary responsibility of their children and not the state. Nevertheless, everywhere one looks in South Korea, one can see the evidence of a national obsession with modernity. Tradition, it would seem, has been reduced to little more than a punchline or a footnote, a mere background for yet more conspicuous consumption and display. South Korean modernity is a highly complex entity that is difficult to address or account for sociologically. But Pyun Hye-young goes into the belly of the beast, the grisly heart of South Korea's complex, compressed modernity, and writes her stories among the entrails she finds there. Evening Proposal is a fascinating story for several reasons, not the least of which is how it evokes the central character's anxiety and uncertainty regarding the nature of life in the city. The city has a central role to play in Pyon's stories, for while the city provides all the conveniences and amenities we associate with modern life, it is also fraught with unexpected danger. At a key point in the story, Mr. Kim visits a town that was located in the vicinity of two geological faults, and some long time ago it had experienced a notable earthquake. The residents of the city live with the constant anxiety and worry that a second earthquake will strike at an unexpected and undetermined point in the future. Whilst they take precautions and run frequent safety drills, an expert warns although we have suffered great losses, this earthquake cannot be compared to the one yet to come. The real fear, indeed, is that we cannot predict when or where the next one will occur. This lingering dread of the future is something that many of Pyun's characters seem to share. The expert concludes by saying, "At this very moment, the earth on which you are standing could split wide open." And this fear symbolizes the way Pyun's characters relate to the potential pleasures and pitfalls of the modern cities in which they live their lives. At any moment, the modern face of the city could crack, and a random, unexpected occurrence could reshape the nature of life. Indeed, Pyun has elaborated on the role of the earthquake in her fiction. She writes that depending on how you look at it, an earthquake is like bad luck. They strike without warning and can cause even a life that appears strong and stable to collapse in an instant. I read an article on earthquakes in a science magazine. It said that in large countries where earthquakes are predicted to happen, even the slightest tremor can cause fatalities. Not because of the earthquake itself, but because people can mistake a tremor for the big one and panic. They might rush out of a building only to accidentally fall to their deaths. Ironically, the desire to live can lead to your death. I felt that this said something about what it means to be human. And so, this headlong desire to embrace life under the shadow of danger is indeed a fundamentally human characteristic. However, in reading Evening Proposal, we quickly realize that Mr. Kim is someone whose essential humanity has perhaps been compromised and distorted by the pressures of modern city life to such an extent that he cares only for himself amidst tragedy. He writes, the misfortune he feared was the misfortune which affected only him, while the rest of the world was safe and well. Evening Proposal begins with Mr. Kim receiving a phone call from an old work colleague telling him their former senior colleague is in the hospital and close to death. This unsettling phone call introduces us to the jaded, cynical worldview held by Mr. Kim. His reaction to the news could seem callous, but instead it just seems that Mr. Kim has been socialized into a supremely uncaring, indifferent attitude towards the people who have, at various times, filled his life. Pyun depicts this with a sense of mordant humor. Kim could not remember exactly, but he felt the elderly man must have reached an age at which no one would be surprised at his passing. Mr. Kim is more concerned that he will not receive any remuneration for the reef he is asked to provide. Importantly, he recognizes the social bonds that obligate the sending of the reef, but he bemoans the tenuous connection and pointlessness of having to observe it. This is one of the first negative effects of compressed modernity we encounter in the story. Mr. Kim's despair at the social bonds he is pointlessly forced to observe. The phone call also exposes Mr. Kim's work life as he reflects that the former colleague making the phone call had once circulated malicious rumors about him. They both worked for a struggling company that was facing legal issues and was failing. The employees accepted a wage reduction, and Mr. Kim jumped ship. We learn that he then subsequently worked for a different company, but his there also somehow ended. We learn that he now runs a florist and that he is often remiss in fulfilling his duties. He lies to his customers. He hopes they suffer accidents that will obviate his responsibilities to them. He is entirely preoccupied with money. These are all signs of a much deeper malaise than mere cynicism that Mr. Kim is experiencing. He's suffering from the effects of living in a compressed modernity. Compressed modernity, argues academic Chang Kyung-sop, is a civilizational condition in which economic, political, social, and or cultural changes occur in an extremely condensed manner in respect to both time and space, and in which the dynamic coexistence of mutually disparate historical and social elements leads to the construction and reconstruction of a highly complex and fluid social system. It exists at every level of human life, and as we shall see, every level of Mr. Kim's life: the individual, the family unit, institutions, the city itself, and on a social level. The individual living in a compressed modernity, like Mr. Kim, is faced with numerous challenges. Their lives, states Chang, need to be managed intensely, intricately, and flexibly in order to remain normally integrated with the rest of society. Mr. Kim is cracking under the pressure. His integration with the rest of society is starting to unravel. His worldview has become distorted far beyond the realms of normal human compassion and empathy. The opening ceremony of a new business might suddenly be disrupted by criminals appearing on the scene. A mother might faint after delivering a stillborn baby. These were the fortunate occasions when it was of no consequence if flowers arrived late. So we can see here the essential reduction of his humanity. As the story progresses, when we learn more about Mr. Kim, we can begin to build a clearer picture of someone struggling with integration into the complex set of signifiers that comprise South Korea's complex modernity. Chang convincingly suggests that if an ordinary South Korean adult hopes to secure a graceful image or position or personhood in general in everyday social life, he or she needs to be able to skillfully exhibit a highly complex set of values and attitudes that are finely tuned to diverse socio-cultural, political, and economic contexts. One of the key weaknesses that is holding Mr. Kim back and preventing him from achieving full personhood is his height. Kim was about 15 centimeters shorter than the average man. He recalled that he had stopped growing when he turned 14. His father had passed away then, and for some time, Kim believed that he stopped growing because of the emotional shock of his father's death. He remains insecure about his height, and it has affected his ability to attract a good mate and succeed in social circumstances in general. He attributes his lack of success in life. What we can see is his general disenfranchisement from mainstream society to his lack of height and his father's early death. He also blamed his father's death for the disorderly path his life had taken and mercilessly accused his father of abandoning his family and leaving him with nothing but this meager height. This is a significant point. Dating is a highly competitive sport in South Korea, supported by a vast, intricately structured industry aligned with a complex social structure. Rules, rituals, tropes, and conventions abound in the South Korean dating sphere. Finding a good, appropriate match can lead to greater integration into South Korea's very complex modernity. Mr. Kim's inability to fully integrate into the world around him is evident in the relationship he does rather ambivalently try to conduct with an unnamed woman. As he attempts to deliver the wreath, he reflects on the status of this relationship. On one level, he understands the social conventions that play out in their interactions, but they also infuriate him, and he often cannot reciprocate as a fully integrated person would. He cannot abide that the woman wants to make small talk. He apparently abhors the pointlessness of it. He's embarrassed by her lack of sophistication in social situations, perhaps because it mirrors his own discomfort. And when he finally does desperately declare love for the woman, it is only because he is in a moment of extreme duress, having seen a vision of his own death. And even then, he recognizes that it means nothing to him, that he would be angry because nothing he said could now be taken back. Ultimately, Evening Proposal paints a picture of a man who has failed at several of the levels where compressed modernity manifests itself. As an individual, he is insecure and jaded. He resents his family, has a downward trending career path, could not be considered a good child, worker, friend, lover, or colleague. Because of his personal drawbacks, he has been unable to attain personhood. As a result, his outlook and perspective have become corrupted by extreme cynicism. His condition, Pyun appears to be arguing, is a symptom of living in a South Korean city. At one point, Mr. Kim says that friendship had nothing to do with a degree of affection, but was a feeling that was valid only when it was dedicated to and reaped benefits for one of the persons involved. Embedded in the story is a warning against this mindset and the environment that creates it. So that almost brings me to the end of my Pyun Hye-young roundup. So there are, I think there's only, I might be wrong, but I think there's only two other stories that are available in English translation. So I briefly mentioned a story called Bodies, and you can find that on the Korean Literature Now website. I was going to include it in this roundup, but I looked at it and I realized I couldn't remember it well enough, so I'll have to reread that again and write a script for it. There's another story called AOI Gardens, which is a sort of a pandemic story. It was written before, the big event from 2020. Super interesting story. I think Pyun said that was inspired by the SARS epidemic in Hong Kong. Anyway, so those are the only other two stories that I'm aware of that are available in English translation. If you know of any more, please do let me know. and I'll try and review those two stories at some point in the future. And one other bit of Pyun news. So there is a film adaptation of The Hole, right? So this is the novel, her first novel that was translated into English, and it won the Shirley Jackson Award in 2017. And The Hole, if you remember, it's about a Korean man, Korean couple, and the man, the Korean couple are in a car crash. The wife dies, and the husband is paralyzed, sort of almost completely paralyzed, and his wife's mother is sort of looking after him, and it's kind of a horror novel, right? And but I noticed in the film adaptation, right, it's about a British guy who's married to a Korean woman, and the Korean wife dies in the car crash, and the British guy is almost completely paralyzed, and it's his Korean mother-in-law that is looking after him. So it's kind of an interesting twist on the story. So anyway, I'm not sure when it comes out, but apparently it's filming now. And the lead actor is a guy called Theo James, who's playing the British guy, who he's actually been in quite a lot of things, but I don't think I've seen him in anything. Like, I looked at his filmography. But the director, it's an American company that's making it, but it's a Korean director whose name I thought I'd written. Oh, Kim Ji-eun. Kim Ji-eun directed I Saw the Devil, which was quite a successful film. And so, yeah, I'm quite looking forward to it. So I assume that if it's only filming just now, it probably won't be out until, next year. And so also, as far as I can tell, there's no new translations from Pyun Hye-young on the horizon. But to be fair, there is a lot already in English translation. Like, I think all her novels and, maybe 50% of her short stories have been translated. So there are a few short stories still out there that haven't been translated. So it'd be great to see those in English. And obviously, it'd be great if she has another novel out sometime. But as far as I'm aware, it doesn't look like there's anything on the horizon in the next several months or next year or so. But anyway, if you've enjoyed any Pyun Hye-young novels or stories, please let me know what's your favorite one. And if you have any suggestions for something you want me to review next, just let me know. And hit the like button, the subscribe button, and ring the bell for more reviews of Korean literature in translation. And thank you for watching. Take care. I'm going to go and cool off now. And I might try and do another review later on today. So take care, and bye-bye.